Africa has always had a fascination of its own. Its strange, wild beauty, its natural grandeur, its wild game, and its mystery have attracted the stronger of the human race to pit their endurance against its hazards. For centuries, men have gone on safari through its swamps and deserts and bush. Today, modern transport has to a large extent opened the closed book of Africa, making its big cities, like Nairobi, places of business and of joy for tourists. In 1953, to commemorate the coronation of Her Majesty the Queen, the Royal East African Automobile Association staged a coronation safari, a rough, tough drive of a little under 2,000 miles. By 1959, it had grown from a purely local affair to an international competition of over 3,000 miles, attracting the best of the world's rally drivers to its lists. And in 1960, it was to be bigger and better than ever before. The route, which included every hazard, started and finished in Nairobi. On the first southern leg, the cars were to travel south to Iringa, then due east to Dar es Salaam, then back almost the same way to Nairobi. The second leg went northwards and westwards around many tortuous ways. Then back to Nairobi again, 3,200 miles in the worst driving conditions ever. To the airport then, with its surprising signpost, came the cream of the rally fraternity. 8 manufacturers had entered teams, and 6 of them were using British cars. At Nairobi's Norfolk Hotel, the drivers of many countries rested and prepared for the toughest drive of their lives, a drive which would test endurance to the limit and the motor cars even beyond it. It was time well spent, for sleep and relaxation were to be very precious commodities in the immediate future. All that could be done was done, and at midnight on the 14th, 15th April, the cars were away. Peter Harper of Alpine and Monty fame. Tommy Wisdom Zephyr. Nancy Mitchell Sunbeam. Ronnie Adams also in a Sunbeam. And Ed Harrison. Yes, all names which can be read in the Golden Book of Rally Driving. The 8th East African Safari, as it is now called, had certainly attracted the world's best drivers and the world's best motor cars. A Mille Miglia type ramp was used, but it was not exactly constructed for a quick getaway. R.C. Garish in a DKW Auto Union. Scott and Balin, Ford. Pitts and Steele, Anglia. The last of the 84 starters was away about 4:15 in the morning. Even by daylight, there are lots of hazards to be met on African roads. The dust from cars in front was unbelievable, and almost anything could happen to a driver in a hurry. All classes had to cover the course at the same average speed, an unbelievable one of over 47 miles per hour, and there were heavy penalties for lateness. After the dust came mud, but they still had to get a shift on. At the Dutch corner control, Young and McNaughton, driving a Zodiac entered by a Nairobi firm, had to do a few running repairs, but it wasn't very serious, and they got away in time. There were over 50 controls, and 50 penalty marks were added to our every minute late. The cars were moving down the southern leg of the course, going towards Kolo, and their passing gave the local kids a lot to think about. Then, to add to all the other hazards of the safari, came the floods. Already, parts of the route had to be altered because bridges had been washed away. But nobody could say the new course was exactly dry. The Fiat of Collings and G's was in trouble. After all, water and motoring don't always mix. Imagine the frustration of a thing like this, in these conditions, when everything depends on hurrying and nothing will go right. Eventually, they got going again, but not before they'd been towed out. This rally was destruction to the cars. To come through and still motor was a triumph. To win, a miracle. When the going got a bit drier, there was a lot of leeway to make up. Everybody had collected penalty points by now. It was a question of pressing on to the bitter end and seeing who had fared the best. One competition manager, contemplating the mounting number of penalties, was heard to refer to cricket scores, and he wasn't far wrong. Most drivers were certainly past their centuries. Watch and admire their skill. There's Ronnie Adams, one-time winner of the Monty. Zebra Striped Shepherd and Mallet were only 8 minutes down, but like a lot of others, they lost more later. But still the cars pressed on. There's the smallest car in the rally, an NSU Prince. Conditions were terrible. The speed was being piled on, and most of them were sliding a bit wide when they came down off Pinar Heights. Once he got round the bend and straightened up, veteran Tommy Wisdom found that driving on African roads has its own very special problems. They don't hurry for anybody, do they? This is the Colo checkpoint, and one by one the remaining cars came in. Time in and time out were both recorded, and no car was allowed to leave the control before the specified time, but very few people got there by then. Anyway, everybody seemed to be hurrying. Jeff Uren, the Ford captain, checked his papers and was away in double quick time. After Colo, there was a dried-up riverbed to cross. That's the Wrights, mother and daughter. From now on, the cars began to drop out thick and fast. The rally course was taking its toll, but still they plowed, or should it be paddled, on. The vast area which the course covered made it impossible for officials to catch up except by air. Edgel Fabris, one of the competition managers, set out to see his drivers in Dar es Salaam, where the furthest point of the first leg was reached. The pace and the conditions were beginning to tell on men and cars alike. The strain of keeping time, the glare of the African sun, and the continuously bumping roads gave no rest even for the co-driver. The regulations stated that no man must drive for more than 2 hours continuously, and it was a wise rule. Only a control gave slight relief and silence after the continuous roar of engines, more often than not in low gear. There's Peter Harper again. Bill Young's Zodiac was still in the running, and Dennis Scott's Work Zephyr was doing nicely. Teammates Vic Preston and John Harrison were there, but they had lost Ed Harrison, who had gone to a flying stone which pierced his radiator very soon after the start. It was just bad luck. Now the way was back to Nairobi, and then, after a rest day, for the second leg of the journey. The winding, tortuous road didn't seem so bad now it led to sleep and an end of bumping and swinging. British cars were leading in Class B, between 750 and 1,000 cc's, a compliment to their tenacity in these adverse conditions. But all the time it was dust and heat and the refined sort of torture, which is the lot of people who go on rallies under these sort of conditions. Only 37 of the 84 entries were still in for the northern leg. Of these, British cars were well placed in both the classes for which they were entered, and the next stage held promise of rather easier motoring. Cuff Harrison was 31 minutes adrift, Hughes 68, but that was only 4 behind the leader of his class, so it wasn't too bad at all. All the cars were showing signs of wear, and very soon there was high drama. Maneusis, out of control at 100 miles an hour, hit the cameraman. Then Young was in trouble again, this time badly, but miraculously, he and co-driver McNaughton were not seriously hurt. Local labor gave a helping hand, and number 50 was back unbelievably in the rally again. Yes, there was plenty of drama in the East African Safari of 1960. Here comes the works Anglia of Pitts and Steele, catching up a bit on lost time. Vic Preston and John Harrison were still running second in the over 2,000 cc class, and watched by interested locals, they made sure they kept it that way and didn't lose themselves. The dust was still coming up over everybody. Peter Harper had a big load of penalties to contend with, and so it went on. Then Bosch and Columbia nearly bought it. Vic Preston and John Harrison were motoring like it was a weekend drive, but a little faster perhaps. British cars were giving a very good account of themselves. It really was one hell of a test for a motor car, particularly for the suspensions, which took an awful beating. Then, more trouble. Bridges were down, and quick rerouting took place. It was a long, weary way they had to travel. They crossed the equator, and in some places the route lay as much as 7,000 feet above sea level. The changes in temperature took it out of the drivers as well as their cars, and always there was the bumping of the rough dirt roads. The Mercedes team had left Nairobi with only 29 minutes in hand over the Zephyrs, and by the time the Nakura control was reached, they'd lost it. The Zephyrs were in the lead, and from then on, the position did not change. The rally was more than half over now, and as expected, conditions were better than in the first part. But before you left one control, you never knew what you'd find before you got to the next, so it was just as well to be prepared. Still dicey moments to come, particularly when Cuff Harrison had to change a wheel, and from then on he knew he was in trouble. Something was seriously wrong. To finish and complete the team, he had to go on and go on fast, but the roads were better now, and he kept it up at 80 miles an hour, knowing that his front stub axle was damaged. It was an awful decision, but it paid off, as you will see. Into Nairobi now, the end is in sight. All around again are the signs of civilization which a motorist knows so well. Yes, even policemen. It was just like home. The speed cops were out, but not apparently to catch rally drivers. First car 21, the outright winner, was the Mercedes of Fritschy and Ellis. They arrived with only 600 penalty points, and at 50 a minute, that's really good. Dennis Scott in the Team Zephyr was fourth in Class E. Then the Zephyr of Preston and Harrison. They were second in their class. The Harrison family, father and two sons, certainly get around. Here's the third of the team, Cuff, the father. The wheel had stayed on, but there was still the brake test to go through. Would it take the strain? If Cuff couldn't do it, the team couldn't win the prize. Moments seemed like hours. Now he's away. Watch. But the car had stopped, the rally was over, the regulations had been observed, and the Fords for the second year running won the manufacturer's trophy. Only 25 finished of the 84 starters for this most grueling of all rallies. 10 of them were British, 9 Fords and 1 Hillman Minx. For Britain, it had indeed been a successful safari. Here's the battered, overturned Zodiac of Young and McNaughton. They did the brake test in spite of its condition. Here's another African entry, but again a British car. The little Anglias had finished first, second, and third in their class. It had been a tremendous test for cars, and only the very toughest could come through. But spare a thought for the drivers. They had made it a safari to success.